Many people know about Japanese internment and surveillance among Arab Americans. It is often spoken about in terms of racial discrimination, but in this video we wanted to address the silent sacrifices of Japanese Americans in hopes to initiate conversation about the victims of the U.S.'s war on terror. So what was Japanese internment, and what is Arab American surveillance? As one of the results to the Pearl Harbor attack, President FDR authorized Executive Order 9066. This order called for the relocation of Japanese descent in America. The goal for issuing this order was to prevent espionage because anyone of Japanese descent was supposedly potential spies. Anti-Japanese propaganda quickly spread, so the executive order also served to protect persons of Japanese descent of threats from racist anti-Japanese Americans.
So as a first step, all Japanese were required to move from critical areas such as these. Notices were posted. All persons of Japanese descent were required to register. They gathered in their own churches and schools, and the Japanese themselves cheerfully handled the enormous paperwork involved in the migration. Now the actual migration got underway. The Army provided fleets of vans to transport household belongings and buses to move the people to assembly centers. The evacuees cooperated wholeheartedly. The many loyal among them felt that this was a sacrifice they could make in behalf of America's war effort.
Arab Americans continue to face discrimination in national security policies and excessive threats towards their constitutional rights. In recent decades, the U.S. government has exaggerated and oversimplified national security-related policy concerns as they exploited many socio-political anxieties in an attempt to justify their disproportionate counter-response to terrorism. These serious transgressions of constitutional rights have been justified in defense of national security since the tragic attack on 9/11. Here's a clip from the San Francisco Human Rights Commission hearing from 2010, where many individuals address the discrimination against those of Middle Eastern descent that is embedded behind government policies and strategies to counter terrorism.
Since 9/11, there has been a steady rise in Islamophobia in this country. However, recent months have seen the exponential rise of anti-Islam and anti-Muslim bigotry.
Today, it's an undisputed fact that the Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and South Asian communities have been cast as a threat.
As you'll hear from many speakers this evening, Arab, Middle Eastern, South Asian, and Muslim communities feel under siege because of the law enforcement surveillance that they're experiencing from the FBI.
My ordeal have lasted for 20 years. I was targeted for deportation from 1987 till 2007, when the government finally put a statement out that we now concluded that those people have done nothing wrong.
One time I became so frustrated that I took out this card. This is a Department of Veterans Affairs cards that U.S. military veterans get. And I earned this by serving 4.5 years in the Air Force. And I was on the verge of just throwing this at the officer and telling him to just take this because it doesn't mean anything as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't mean anything to not have a criminal record, to have served your country, to have sacrificed, to struggle both with yourselves and others to try to make yourself a better citizen, a more responsible citizen. And just because you're a Muslim, you're exposed to this humiliation.
Although I was unable to find the author of the blog, U.S. Prison Culture, the author shared many compelling testimonies about his studies on Japanese incarceration. In a blog titled Silence and Suppression, The Mass Incarceration of Japanese Americans, the author states, "I've noticed the many silences in the telling and retelling of this history. I've pondered the trauma and unspoken grief that made the accounts of this forced removal to American concentration camps. Yet it appears that most of the country remains largely unaware about this heinous chapter in American history. Part of the history of Japanese internment and incarceration in the U.S. has been disappeared by the reliance on a language of euphemism. Thousands of people, 70% of them native-born citizens, were falsely accused and incarcerated for crimes that they did not commit under the guise of national security. As a Muslim American, I can't help but find eerie similarities between 1942 and post-2011 America. I think that we need to do more to educate Americans about this grave injustice, and we need to be focused on the ways that we continue to criminalize entire groups of people today under the guise of national security threats. Although Japanese internment camps took place over 3/4 of a century ago, they left a powerful legacy, influencing everything from where many Japanese Americans were born and raised to how they relate to their elders and raise their children. Keeping memories of the incarceration alive also gives Japanese Americans the power and responsibility to speak out when other groups are unfairly targeted because of their race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, or other identity. Having once been victims of such discriminatory policies, Japanese Americans are keenly aware of that history. This gives their voice special authority in speaking out for others. There are valuable lessons for all Americans, citizens, immigrants, and refugees alike, to remember as we confront challenges like Islamophobia, increasing hate violence, and the deep-seated nature of institutional racism that criminalizes Black and brown communities across the country. The issue of surveillance of Arab Americans is often swept under the rug, or simply justified using the incident that took place on the infamous 9/11. Arab Americans and Japanese Americans share a direct link in the circumstances they experience, the effects of being imprisoned looming over them both. Communities both share a great deal of fear, yet both communities react differently in response to the fear, and the primary reason for this is the gap in between time periods. Luckily, today we have organizations like the Arab American Action Network, American Friends Service Committee, and the Japanese American Service Committee that help many people access the resources that they need as they find their place in America. Here are some videos we were able to capture when we met with two of the organizations to learn about the work that they do.
So American Friends Service Committee, has anybody ever heard of AFSC? Yeah, I'm not surprised. You had heard of them. So we're actually, it's a pretty interesting organization, and I had never heard of the organization before I started working here, but it's a Quaker social justice organization. We are in 30 different locations around the U.S. and 15 different countries. You can kind of see the little map there. And so we do all different kinds of work. We work on immigration, we work on we call it healing justice, other people may call it like criminal justice issues, mass incarceration, those kinds of things. We work on what's called peace building, which means a lot of different things in a lot of different places. But what it means here in Chicago, and I have some of these things you guys can pass out, but here in Chicago, our program has two areas that we focus on. One is defunding the police, and then moving those funds toward needs in the community that actually can help keep people safer, like adequate housing, mental health services, and education.
This organization has been, working very hard to serve as sort of a hub for the Japanese community, and whether it's providing social services for elders, or cultural and language programs for youth and anybody who's interested in Japanese, the arts. We do a lot of activities in the Japanese cultural arts sector, and we do advocacy work as well. So, we, as I had mentioned, we've been working, the Japanese American community has been working very closely with the Arab American and Muslim community over the years, and then it has increased, since Trump came into power, and the rhetoric kind of got crazier.
These issues are very relevant to modern society because of intergenerational trauma and the lack of communication of the psychological effects the Japanese and Arab Americans endure only serves to make the effects even longer lasting. Without researching the link between these two communities, the U.S. government would be able to continue its deceitful tactics, and it would be difficult to pinpoint the origins of these issues.